Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. Tonight we have Mike Petersen with us, representative from Cache Valley.
That's right.
Good to have you, Mike.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, we've known each other, since we both got elected the same year, and had a good time there. So let's talk a little bit about you. We were just talking, and you lived in Roy when you were a kid.
I did. Started
was
out in
funny.
Riverdale, then Roy.
So we just found out we went to the same elementary school, so
Yeah.
that's pretty funny.
Yeah, through second grade.
Yeah. So what happened when you were young? I mean, what did you do?
My family moved quite a number of times when I was younger. We had 6 kids, and my parents, I guess, as a way to increase income, we'd get a home and remodel and work on the yard, put in a fence, all that kind of thing, and then move. So we moved around a bit, and then my dad, when I was young, he lost his sight. He was a electrician at Hillfield.
Oh, interesting.
Lost his sight, so he went to Weber State College, did a bachelor's degree in sociology, and then we moved to Provo. So he went to BYU to do a master's degree in rehabilitative counseling, with the intention of moving back to Ogden, because this is where my grandparents all lived. My cousins, everybody lived in Ogden. But we moved to Provo, and for whatever reason, I think it was primarily because my dad took a job with the state. He was a rehabilitative counselor for the state, worked for the blind and visually handicapped. In fact, as a young boy, I could read Braille. I did.
Wow.
I used an abacus, because my dad would teach folks how to how to clean, how to count their money, all the things they need to do as a visually impaired person, and he taught us kids a lot of those skills, and I can't do them anymore. But anyway, so
you can't read Braille anymore.
Not anymore. I wish I could, but so we lived in so like I say, we moved to Provo when I was 7 and stayed there.
So how'd you end up in Cache Valley?
So I finished my master's degree at BYU. Sally, my wife, had a master's degree in communicative disorders. She's a speech pathologist. And I finished a degree in counseling psychology. And my family, like I say, was from Ogden, but my family was sealed in the Logan LDS Temple when I was a little boy. And I'd not been back. And so after I'd graduated, we decided we'd take a drive to Logan and see what Logan was like. I hadn't been there for 50 years almost. Well, at that time, I guess it was about 35 years. So we drove there and happened to go by the school district office, the Logan School District. And so Sally and I went in, and wouldn't you know, they just had an opening for a counselor. That's what I was made to do at that point. And they just had a speech pathologist. Unfortunately, had just passed away a couple of weeks earlier, and they had a spot for Sally. So they asked if we'd interview. We said we didn't come to interview, and they begged us, so we stayed and interviewed. And then they called us the next morning and said, "Hey, could you come back? We'd like to have you interview with the principals of schools." So we came back the following Monday, and they offered us jobs. So we moved to Cache Valley, and that's,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, so when you were there, though, you started a PhD program then at Utah State.
While I was a counselor at Logan High School, originally we thought, well, this will work great. I'll do a PhD in psychology at Utah State. And at this point, between a master's degree and working in the field, I'd been doing counseling for 10 or 12 years, and I sort of decided it really wasn't what I wanted to do any longer. I think I just have a little too much empathy. I just feel things really deeply, and I just said, I don't think I can do this till I'm 70 years old. It'll kill me. So I went back to school, did a PhD in instructional design and learning science. So I studied, how do people learn? What are the right ways to teach people? It's not about systems or schools. It's not about administration. It's about actually, how do you teach people? How do you message things? What are the correct ways to teach people different kinds of knowledge? And so, like I said, I did a PhD in instructional design and learning science. While I was doing that, started a business with a couple of fellow students, and that was in '97. And So there we are.
That's what you ended up doing.
Yeah.
That's cool. So you have a software business, right?
It's really an instructional design business.
Okay.
It's called letterpress software, but we are an instructional design business. So we when universities or government agencies or the church or the military, if they have a problem with folks not being able to do what it is they're supposed to be able to do to be successful in their career, they come to us and we help them figure out what are the right ways to teach what it is that folks need to know. So we always do it online. So it's, in a way, it's a software company, but at its heart, we are an instructional design company.
So you basically design the curriculum that they're going to use
That's
in
right.
order to train people in their organization.
Yep.
And so the software that you wrote really works for any kind of training, right? You
Correct.
just put the training in there.
That's right.
And that's what people are buying from you.
So in fact, little base, you may or may not be interested, but I'll throw it out there. And if you don't like it, you can always edit this out. So the name of the company is Letterpress Software.
Right.
A letterpress, as you probably know, was invented by Johannes Gutenberg as a way to help the masses have the Bible.
Right.
Well, because before the letterpress, you had to wait for a monk to write it out for you. It was an expensive, long process, and obviously not many people were able to have a Bible. So we invented some from the university. We'd learned some techniques, and the three of us, we invented some ways to teach, or to build some software that would teach in a very effective, efficient way, where we could reduce the costs to create training for organizations. So that's why we named it Letterpress Software. We wanted to be able to say to people, the cost of training shouldn't be the hindrance. It shouldn't prevent you from learning what it is you need to learn so you can be successful in your career.
Right.
We don't want that to be the holdup.
Yeah, that's interesting. So something I know about you that's kind of interesting, other people don't know. You're a sailor, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it's kind of funny. I've always been attracted to the water. I love the water. I love the ocean. Live in Utah. It's a little landlocked.
Yeah.
Sally, my wife, is from Long Beach, California. She also loves the ocean, loves the water. Spent, her summers at the ocean. Well, we were in Alaska 10 or 12 years ago with some of our kids, and we have always had this habit of going to, wherever we travel to, we always visit the marina. For some reason, we always just like to see what boats are going on. So we were in Alaska and at a marina and got talking to this couple that were sitting in their boat. Spent about 45 minutes, and as we walked away, I said to my son-in-law, "Boy, I wish we could do that. I wish we had a sailboat like that." And he said, "Well, why don't you get one?" And I said, "Well, I couldn't afford a boat like that." He said, "I'll bet you could go on KSL." Well, we came home, and long story short, we bought a boat with some friends and ended up having a sailboat. We took lessons in San Diego, and now we have a 30-foot boat over at Bear Lake. It stays in a marina in a slip during the summer months, and now we love to sail all weekend.
So during the summer months, it's out on the lake, right?
Yep.
What happens when you close it down? Do you leave it at the lake?
So the Bear Lake State Park will allow boats 25 feet or longer to be stored there in the parking lot during the wintertime. We actually are across the street at another facility where they let some folks do that as well. But yeah, the boat has to be taken out. There's a few boats that stay in there that they have
basically stay in the water.
Yeah, they'll stay in the water, but they install what they call bubblers. They're big fans that go under the water, one on either side of the bow, that operate and just keep the water churned up so that the water can't freeze and crush the hull.
Oh.
Yeah.
So does that lake freeze all the way to?
Oh yeah, it's frozen right now. There's 20-something inches thick.
Yeah, my experience with that lake is it's frozen no matter when you go there.
No,
Yeah.
John, you and Heather, we got to come.
It's too cold for me.
No, but you know what? We the truth is we don't spend a lot of time
in the water,
swimming in the water. There's nothing like being on a sailboat, heeled over at 20 degrees or so, just tooling along. There's no sound of the motor. There's a little Kenny Loggins or Barry Manilow playing in the background. We're talking. Run down and grab some food, come back up, and it's got an auto helm, So I set the coordinates, and it just steers itself, and
Well, that's pretty cool.
it's awesome.
That's something you actually have to learn how to do, though, right?
To sail?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a skill. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we chose sailing versus just a powerboat. I'll tell you a funny story. So Sally's brother, one time when he found out that we bought the boat, he was so excited. Can I borrow it? Absolutely, you can borrow it anytime you want. But a sailboat, operating a sailboat isn't just like,
Like a
there's
power.
not just a throttle that you just
Yeah.
move back and forth. So, yeah, but
Yeah,
we love it.
You need to learn a little bit about it.
Yeah.
That's cool. So let's talk now about why did you run for office? That seems, what motivated you to start with?
Yeah, everybody always wants to know that. Over the years, I've always thought about running for elected office, and it just never worked out. There was never really a good time to do it. But 3 or 4 years ago, the tax reform bill, I don't know if you remember that, the tax bill came out, and contrary to what most people didn't like about it, because most people said they didn't like that it increased the tax here, reduced here. There were all kinds of tax things, changes that were involved in it. But for me, I really like our Republican Party platform. And I don't know if you remember, but it's got a section in there on taxation. And one of the things it says is the Republicans prefer or fight for tax code that is short, easy reporting procedures and so forth. Well, that bill was thousands of lines, and it affected countless numbers of other state statutes. It was just enormous. It was certainly not an example of Republican idea of simplified rules and reporting. That's why I originally got into it and said, this has got to change. Well, it just turns out that I worked at Macy's. I took shifts at Macy's from 5 to midnight for a few days to get people to sign remember the tax
Right.
reform?
Yeah.
To get the referendum on the ballot. And one night I came home, I was all wound up because I'd been there for a few hours and talking with people, and I just went online and thought, I wonder how my legislator voted on this and other things. And as I looked, I just said, you know what? I don't think the representative in my valley does what I would have done, and it just got me thinking about running for office. Things with work, things with my church assignments had sort of settled down, and so I said, this is the time, and we jumped in.
I'm glad you said we, because I know your wife knocked on a lot of doors.
She's knocked on a lot of doors. Yeah. Fortunately, when school ends, because she just speaks pathologist at a school. When school ends, she's more than happy, but she's more than willing to go out and start knocking on doors, passing out pamphlets, and we give U.S. constitutions at every home, and
Oh, that's cool.
she's been a big help. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've already been through one re-election.
Yep. And it was as fun as the first one.
Yeah, you had to run against the same guy again, right?
Yep.
Who'd been in there for quite a while.
Well, he'd served at the state capitol for 4 years, but his tenure in politics had been 17 or 18 years because he'd been on the city council, he'd been the mayor, been on the county council, and I tell people, look, I give him credit because he ran unopposed, I believe, in every one of those elections, at least in the primary, every one of those elections. Because nobody else wanted to do it, so I give him kudos. He stepped up to the bat every time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't always like the way he batted,
But you like that he was willing to do it.
but you got to give him credit for that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's true of anyone that goes in there, especially after you've served. That some of it's fun.
it's not always fun though, is it?
No, it isn't. Especially as you start getting calls from people because of legislation that you've been put forward or something.
Yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about one bill you had that I bet you've gotten a lot of calls on.
I've got a few calls that I've saved on my phone just
to motivate you.
Just to motivate me once in a while and keep me humble too, because sometimes people get pretty irate.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we know that's all part of the game, isn't
Yeah.
it? We're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about that.
Fireside Chat with civil rights activist Robert Woodson, discovering unity through shared values. Join us April 11th at 6:30 p.m., Weber State University, Val A. Browning Center.
Welcome back. We're talking with Mike Petersen, representative from Cache Valley in the House. I want to talk about some of your legislation. What piece of legislation have you been involved with that you feel really good about?
There have been several, but this last session is we were able to pass a piece of legislation that I think is, for me, the most consequential piece that I've been involved in. And I feel pretty blessed to have been able to take part in something that I think was pretty important. And that's the one, we passed a bill that deals with conversion therapy. As kids struggle with gender identity and sexual orientation questions. Well, let me. Do you mind if I read something?
Go ahead.
So in state statute right now, well, not now.
Yeah, now it's changed.
It's been changed
before.
But a few weeks ago, what it was that if a minor patient had questions about sexual orientation or gender identity, really the only thing that the counselor could do was to affirm that person's feelings. So in other words, imagine a 13-year-old girl who's going to school, having some changes to her body as she's maturing. She goes on social media, she talks with friends, and she's starting to have some questions about who she is. Especially today, I mean, there's just so much out there. Well, if she goes to the counselor and wants to get some help, the counselor really was only able to affirm and say, you know what, you're right. You aren't a girl, you're a boy.
Yeah, so if she went into the counselor and she said, I think I'm a boy. The only thing the counselor could say was,
you are a boy, and now let's work and see what we can do to help your parents come along with this, and your school and your friends, and help you make the transition. We'll set up some appointments with the physician and get things started. That was pretty much it. If you're a boy, let's say you're a 14-year-old boy and thinking, at some point I want to serve a church mission.
Right.
But I'm having some attractions to other boys in my class. I want to go and talk to my counselor and see, can you maybe help me repress those things? Maybe not act on them, not because I don't want to act on them. Nope, can't do that. I had a patient years ago that I worked with who struggled with bestiality.
Interesting.
According to the state statute that was in place, the counselor couldn't address that. It would have been illegal. It was prohibited. You could lose your license for helping a child, a minor patient who's struggling with that issue. So, as a former counselor, as I learned about this, I said, something's wrong with this. I called some of my old colleagues and learned that, you know what, folks are moving out of the state. People are not practicing. In their practice, they're limiting who they deal with. They don't want to talk with minors because it's just too scary. They don't want to lose their license, which is in essence losing their livelihood. So I worked with Brady Brammer, Representative Brammer, and he originally had the idea that we could say, look, conversion therapy is not talk therapy. That was the basis of the bill. Right. And that's what I put out originally. It didn't go over very well. Talk therapy not being conversion therapy did not go out very well. So I spent the next several weeks literally meeting 3 or 4 times a week for multiple hours with folks from around the state who represent the LGBT community, to university law professors, to just everybody I could get a hold of. Come and let's meet in this room and let's talk about this and figure out how can we make it so that the goal was counselors need to be able to talk to kids and kids need to be able to talk with counselors. That's the objective.
And you wanted them to be able to practice their profession, basically, right?
They're educated and they're licensed. And then we say, but you can't do this. It just didn't make sense. I mean, you think about it, John. If you go to the doctor with any other ailment, I got a hangnail to a headache to pain in my side, the doctor's going to examine you. Let me look at that finger. John, how long have you had the headache for? What's the family history with headaches? They're going to examine, they're going to do, run some tests, do an x-ray. But if you go to the doctor and say, I think I'm a boy, okay, and they just move on. There's nothing else that a doctor could be presented with.
Yeah, and
They
in
would
this
just go
case,
for
it's
it.
a psychologist, right? That's
Yeah,
that's
but
talking.
it could be anybody. It could be a
Right.
physician. It could be anybody. But it was just a strange situation. we
Well,
were in.
and what a lot of people don't understand is that wasn't even a law in Utah. It was an administrative rule
And
that
you know
was
that
put into place.
you know how that came about.
No.
So in 2019, then Representative Craig Hall had a bill about conversion therapy, and it's pretty much the exact language that's in administrative law right now, or administrative rule. So he had this bill, and it met with all kinds of difficulty in the legislature. The House was having nothing to do with it. They didn't like it because it was just too restrictive. It just tied the hands of the counselor, so that all they could do was affirm. And so the heat in the legislature was turned up, and it just wasn't flying. So he pulled back, and Governor Herbert pretty much took the same text and put it into administrative rule, just circumvented the whole process, and it became a rule. So yeah, that's where we.
Well, I know the Administrative Rules Committee. I mean, Brammer's
Brammer.
on that committee, right?
Yeah.
And Kurt Bramble.
Yep.
I remember talking to Bramble about this particular rule, and they said they would take it up in that committee. So they actually struck that rule.
Yeah,
Didn't
it's gone.
vote it back in, right?
That's right.
But then you felt a need to actually put it into law.
Well, so it was still in rule until the end of this last session.
Right.
Yeah, and had we not done anything, it would have still been there. Interesting to think about. You know, the governor could have stricken that rule. The legislature could have stricken that rule, but for a variety of reasons, we decided that the best thing would be to put it in state statute. And so if you look at the law, and it was HB 228. If you look at it, you see we explicitly outlaw. I'm going to call it outlaw, not just prohibit. We outlaw the barbaric things you really think about when you think about conversion therapy. You know, the electric shocks and all those kinds of things. Those are explicitly out.
Right.
But
Which they haven't been practiced for long.
no, they haven't been practiced anyway. That's part of the goofy thing about this whole situation. But we also explicitly say, and this is the part I was most excited about, is that we explicitly say you can talk about family history, you can talk about trauma, you can talk about development. So, you know, again, you've got a child who's 13, 14 years old, wondering who they really are, and you can say, look, you're in a stage of development, and I'll bet you in a few days this could change. In a few years, it will change. You couldn't talk about those kinds of development. You couldn't talk about trauma. You couldn't talk about the fact that maybe autism has something to do with this. You couldn't deal with any of those kinds of issues. Now they are in code that you can talk about these things.
Yeah, and it seems kind of strange that we went from, you know, shock therapy to, which actually had been done away with way before that first bill even came up.
Yeah.
But that's what you heard about in the paper, right? Because that's what generated the emotion, and so people.
And it was very prevalent too. It was. I mean, it was for real. It was happening. There were people's lives who were hurt by those barbaric conversion therapy practices. I talked to many people, and many people sent me messages to tell me the horrific feelings that it caused for them, the problems that it caused for them. So. I'm glad that it's on the rule book now.
Right.
I'm glad it's there that says you cannot do this.
Right. But the other piece of this, though, was that they said they went a little bit far in a way, right? Because they said, well, you can only affirm people's feelings, and that seems kind of strange in terms of understanding what a psychologist would normally do, right?
Well, in many states across the country did this. 30-something states adopted a conversion therapy ban similar to this one, and the hope now is that you know, the majority of those will now adopt what we've done and said, oh, you know, we could pull back. You know, John, that across the globe, countries are pulling back on some of their affirming treatments. And they're saying, you know, this isn't the time. This isn't appropriate for these kids. And so we're hoping that other states will look at this and say, you know, we could do something like this.
You know,
too.
it's interesting because at the first of the session when we were talking about this, I had several conversations with you. But one of the things I thought about at that time, I was pretty sure that we were going to be able to get the rule written out of administrative rules, right?
Yeah.
So the rule not being adopted again. But you were pretty persistent about saying, no, we need a law too. We need this to be in code so people can understand what they can do and what they can't do, right?
So let me tell you three things that I learned from this.
Okay.
One is, you said persistent. One is I learned that it's important to be patient as a lawmaker. Don't try to do things too quickly. Trust people. And then finally, and I don't put these in any particular order, finally is to try to put your objective, the purpose of your legislation, in terms that you can garner support. See, when I first looked at this, the idea was we're going to ban conversion therapy, right?
Right.
And we're going to make it so kids can so that
So you were going to ban this affirmation,
and we were going to make the talk therapy be okay.
right?
Well, as I looked at that and I could see that just different people were unhappy with different aspects of this, I said, okay, what do we really want to have happen? And what could people coalesce around? Well, everybody can coalesce around the idea that a counselor can talk.
Right.
Everybody can coalesce around the idea that a child can talk. Okay, let's start from there. And so so when we'd meet with all these lawyers, everybody, that was the framework, was we need to make it so people can talk. So that was part of it, I think, was making it objective that people can coalesce around. Who can argue with either of those
Right.
of those ideas? And then the patients, and I spoke with you during the session about some frustrations I was having.
Right.
Even leadership was interfering sometimes that would, in a way that at the time was really bothering me. But as time progressed, I realized, I'm not going to rush this. Let's let this process play. In fact, that's one of my whole things with legislation is sometimes, we try to rush things too quickly.
Right.
Especially at the end of a session, we'll lift the rules and we'll bypass committee
Right.
meetings and things. No, let's take our time with this. Let's get this thing right, so that it benefits the state of Utah, and not just the state of Utah, but the people that live in the state of Utah. That's what we got to think about, is what's going to benefit them, and they're most benefited when we take time and really are thoughtful about how we go about this process. So the exciting thing about this for me, John, was that by the time we were finished, no one was in opposition. And when I say no one, I mean no one. I went to in both committee hearings, and by the way, I'd mentioned to Marina Lowe, the attorney for Equality Utah, and Troy Williams. I said, look, I'm not bringing people to come and speak about this. I don't want to make a big circus event. I don't want to have people come in and tell their horror stories about conversion therapy. Let's just we've met, we've done this. Let's just see if we can move forward. So that first committee meeting, I'll never forget sitting down. I gave my presentation. There was one or two very simple questions. Marina Lowe came up and read a statement from Equality Utah, and she was followed, I think, by Gail Rizika of the Eagle Forum. Other people came up, the Zoom callers. Everybody was positive. Not a single negative word. They were all grateful. We took it to the floor of the House of Representatives. Same thing. It was positive. In fact, the first person that spoke was in tears as she thanked me, and she was just grateful that it was in place.
Right.
Same thing when we went over to the Senate. In fact, Senator Kennedy, because we presented in Senator Kennedy's Health and Human Services Committee, and he finally said, "Look, take the love fest outside. We don't need to. We know where this is going."
Right.
But everybody coalesced around the ideas, and it worked out really well. So
Yeah, you struck the right balance there and
I was
brought people together. That was good.
well, and I had a lot of help. I mean, especially I have to give a shout out to Brady Brammer, Representative Brammer. He helped me be patient, and he helped mentor me through the whole process. So
That's good. Yeah, that's quite that's a heavy lift. That bill was really.
well, in fact, I started out with I think 5 bills that I had planned to run, and when I talked with Casey Snyder, Representative Snyder, who's over the House Rules Committee, I'd say, keep those other 2 in rules. I don't have the gas to keep working on new bills and have to go, build bridges and fight and do things, because I was pretty worn out.
Yeah, I was grateful though that you would sign on to DEI
Yeah.
bill, right?
I'm glad for that.
Which I think, needs some work. We need to have conversations about it, but it's another thing that some of these issues are tough to take on because, the light starts coming back, and I like shining light on things, right? Because it allows people to see what's really there. But sometimes that negative press that you get from that is pretty tough. And I actually thought you would get a lot more negative things in the press about your bill, but it seemed to kind of settle down.
We did for a few days. I mean, even Equality Utah, they were tweeting out some things, and the newspaper had said some things. But then once we made that shift with them, all the press changed, and everything was good. To your DEI bill, I think there's some ways we can craft that one too, and think about how can we make a statement, make a purpose statement or an objective of this that we can get people to agree with, because I'm sure there are some things that can be done to
Well, I mean,
bring people along.
One thing that we're doing on Tuesday night here at Weber State, we're actually bringing in Woodson, who did the 1776 Unite project.
Yeah.
And the reason why we're doing that is they had just had a visit from Hannah Jones that wrote the 1619 project, right? And so one of the things I think that's important is, if you're trying to get rid of something, you've got to have something to fill that void.
Yeah.
And to satisfy what the desire really is. I mean, I have no problem with teaching history about everybody, right?
That's right.
And warts and all. It's important for people to understand that. But the question is, what's that right balance, right?
I'm a believer that bipartisanship isn't the goal. I hear that quite often. We need more bipartisanship. And for me, bipartisanship is not the goal. The goal is good policy.
Right.
So I look at like the bill we just talked about, HB 228, or the one that you're talking about with the DEI. I know there are common issues or common beliefs or principles that folks on all across this globe and all across this state agree with. And let's start from there and work from there. And I think that we would all agree. Let's talk about history.
Yeah.
All of it.
Right.
The good, the bad, and the ugly. And there is plenty of the good and the bad and the ugly.
Yeah, we don't want people to make it up. But,
No.
But if we have something that legitimately occurred, and sometimes you shine different lights on it too.
That's right.
Right, and you can look at it from different perspectives. I don't have a problem with that, as long as there's transparency in what's taking place.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes people tend to make up some things, and I don't want to make up what happened.
So let's talk now. This session, it's great from my perspective. We have a big class of strong conservative people that have come in, and we this session we passed a lot of things that would have been hard a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Right. You think about it. We've got school choice.
Yeah, that was a great one.
That was something that I was hoping we would get to.
I was too.
We had a bill to.
We had it last year. Remember, we had the one from last year, the Hope Scholarship Bill, and originally I was supportive of it. I'd been on a few Zoom calls during the summer to draft that and think about that. But by the time it worked through the process, it got changed up, and there were too many things that I couldn't agree with, and I ended up having to vote against it. I can't remember if you were where you were last year, but I had to vote against it. So I was really glad this year to have one that stayed clean and I could support.
Yeah, I thought they did a really good job of crafting it. What was tough for me is I didn't think I'd have to fight people on the right to have school choice. Right, and we did.
We did,
and that was a tough thing for me, going against people that I knew, right, and I wasn't really trying to get them to do something, but I didn't care if I convinced them. What I cared about was to stop the viral nature of what they were putting out there against it.
Well, and the problem was, because I had some dear friends come out to me, very unhappy. But the problem with what their concerns was that they were ill-founded. people talk about, oh, it's a voucher bill, and all of a sudden all these visions of what that means, and they hadn't read, they didn't know what it actually did, and so they were the folks that weren't happy with me, for the most part, didn't know what the bill did. They were thinking about a bill from 20 years ago
Right.
that had some other things that they didn't like, or from last year that they didn't like, and once they knew what was there, for the most part, I was able to satisfy people's concerns, and I think for the most part it went really
Well, and if people look at that, they say we took all this money out of education, but the reality of it is that was what, $40 million, right?
Yeah.
But we gave over $200 million in new raises for school teachers
that are permanent. It's not just a one-time bonus; it's every year.
Yeah, every year you get that. In fact, that was another bill that I actually co-sponsored.
And by the way,
Senate. Yeah,
it was also sort of secured. You know, sometimes we send money to the school district, and they take off their piece
Right.
and then give it to the.
well,
the
I
teacher.
like the idea that it was a lump sum amount too, directly to teachers.
It's directly to teachers. That's
because
right.
that helped new teachers a lot more. People that were at lower salary levels were getting the same
Yeah.
amount of money, right? Which impacted them a lot more than it
That's
did
right.
as a percentage of their pay, right?
Yep.
And I ended up liking that, and almost $900 million in new funding in
Oh.
public ed.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about $40 million, we're not bankrupting public ed to give people scholarships so that their students can go elsewhere.
Well, and unfortunately, there's so much. You know, we mentioned the 6019 project. There's so many things being taught in schools, not by everybody, not at every school, but there are plenty of reasons for teachers or for parents, for parents to be concerned and worried. And there's, I think it's correct that we give them options, that we don't say, even though you don't appreciate or don't agree with that, you have to send your children to that system.
Right.
I think that's wrong, and so I'm glad that now parents have more
Well,
opportunity.
and something else that people don't realize. I mean, largest tax cuts in history from this
Yeah,
session.
how much? 900 million, something like that?
Yeah, including eliminating the, raising the cutoff point for taxing on Social
That's
Security. That went up to $75,000 now. We took the state's portion of the property tax
Yeah.
off. We had another bill that said we'll take if we adjust, this will have to be a ballot question.
Yep.
Right? There are certain times when the legislature actually says the people need to decide this, right? And as far as that earmark for education on income tax, if that comes off, then the tax will come off of food. We just have to have a way of, balancing things a little bit better
Yep.
between the different types of taxes that we have. And so, that was another thing. Tim Jimenez's bill,
Oh, that was a great
critical race theory, right? We've now banned critical race theory from schools. So,
was it Katie Hall that stops universities from requiring a DEI statement?
yeah, now that bill didn't pass. And that's one of the things that I have the most problem with in terms of this DEI on college campuses.
Me too.
Because I don't like the idea that you have to write a statement and agree with someone's, what I consider a political view, in order to get hired. Right.
I was really surprised. I pulled up one of our universities has a position for a dean of a department, not a history department, not of an English department, I think it was, and within the requirements, 3 different times it talks about the requirement they are DEI compatible,
Right.
and that they're not just compatible, but they sponsor, that they prove to us that you're a proponent of DEI.
Right.
I have a problem with
Yeah.
that.
Well, along those same lines, the ESG, we had 4 successful ESG bills to eliminate that in certain aspects in Utah, right?
And so, why do you suppose? Because there were a number of folks who voted against those ESG bills. What do you think's the
Well,
part of that?
I think that I think there's people who've drunk the Kool-Aid on this diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they don't. I don't think they realize it's actually a political agenda. there's a specific political agenda behind those things, and
Yep.
and people are having a hard time separating that because everybody wants diversity, right? Everybody wants inclusion. I mean, that's the problem. The words are good words, right? And things that you would normally support. But the interesting thing is they're just another way of pushing critical race theory into.
Well, when you think of diversity, in, if you look at their definition of it, it talks about diversity in sexual orientation, diversity in religion, diversity in race, diversity in everything. But go and look at our DEI departments across the state, and you won't find a diversity in religion or diversity.
I think the hardest thing is when you think about a university is that's a place for academic freedom. That's the place for freedom of thought, right? Rather than compelling people to think a certain way.
That's right.
And
but that's what we're doing.
And hopefully we can work all those things out in the interim and come up with some legislation that'll actually be helpful.
Well, I'm certain that there are things that some principles that everyone will agree with that we don't want. For example, we don't want racism. We don't want discrimination. I think people will agree. Yeah. Who's going to argue that against stopping any discrimination?
Right. So and I, that's why I want to talk about your bill specifically on the transition, the talk therapy and other things, because you started out with something that I thought was a really heavy lift, but ended up bringing everybody together. And so that's what that's what we hope to do on these other things, right?
Yeah. Is
finding that right mix. Well, Mike, it's great having you. We're out of time, but why don't you if you had a few things that you wanted to tell people that you represent, what would you say, just in some closing thoughts?
I would say, first and foremost, this is a wonderful state and a wonderful country, and I believe it was the country and our state was set apart by our Heavenly Father, and we ought not give up. I don't think He's given up on us. I think that we need to trust Him, and we also need to follow His admonition to be active in this. He didn't send us here for us to just sit and watch other people do all the work. If there are things we're not happy about, let's get up and voice those concerns. Let's get up and let's get up and be active and help stand up for things that are right and that are good and that protect people's liberty and people's ability to be agents unto themselves. I'd also say that this country and this state is filled with wonderful people. Let's not try to jump into people's minds and think, oh, he's got nefarious purposes for this.
Right.
I think we're all children of God, and I think with rare exception, people are trying to do the best they can with what they've got, and that we need to be patient with each other and trusting of each other. That doesn't mean that we give in to our principles, but that we show love and we help, and we be patient and trust one another. Qualities I think that God has. He trusts us. I think that it's important that we continually consider the principles that make America great. And they are biblical principles.
Right.
This country was founded on biblical principles. I think we need to stay focused on that. We need to stay focused on the Constitution. And I would say that we need to stay focused also on the party platform,
right,
that I know you believe in, I believe in. We need to stay principled. People ask me sometimes, what do you like most about being in the legislature? Well, I got to tell you, it's the people. I love my colleagues, and I've loved all the people I've gotten to meet across the state. What's my biggest disappointment? The people. Yeah. And it's because sometimes I in my estimation, they've sort of forgotten those principles. We get too caught up with worrying about elections. We get too worried about our own hobbies, our own interests, and we fail to remember these principles that made that make America great and that made our country and our state so prosperous. And if we'd get back to those, I think we'd be far more successful. So
Thank you.
there you go.
Great having you, Mike Petersen. Thank you. We'll see you next week.